My son forgot to hang up. I heard his plan to erase me. Oh, I was always that calm woman, who offered comfort and advice, who prepared Sunday dinners and made apple pie for the grandchildren. When my son asked to live with me for a while with his wife and children, I opened the door with joy, thinking we would live days of affection and family reconnection. But it took just one forgotten phone call to turn my world upside down. At 61 years old, I discovered that behind the kindness, there was a plan, and that love sometimes disguises itself as silence and omission. It was at that moment that I stopped being the nice one. Today, my story is about listening to the invisible, protecting what is mine, and being reborn with firmness and dignity. I am very happy to have you here with me. Follow this journey to the end, and tell me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far my story has reached. The potatoes were in the oven, the aroma of rosemary filled the kitchen, and the apple pie was cooling on the sideboard. It was Sunday, my favorite day. There was something comforting about preparing food for those I love. Jason was coming with the little ones, Ben and Lily, and even Vanessa, always so controlled, would be present. Life in these moments seemed to warm up again inside me. I chose the blue china, an inheritance from my mother, and aligned the silverware with the precision of someone who understands that care in the details reveals love. While I set the table, I remembered old Christmases, when Jason was still a boy and ran through the house, dirtying the rug with snow. I missed that time when everything seemed simpler. But I held on to the idea that this dinner could be an attempt at a reunion. Their arrival had changed the routine of the house, but I accepted it calmly. The children filled the spaces with laughter and drawings scattered over the furniture. Vanessa, on the other hand, always demonstrated impeccable manners. Polished, attentive, engaging even too much. Something about her seemed extracted from a script, as if every word were rehearsed. I know I am suspicious by nature, but when one lives so long in silence, one learns to listen to what is behind the words. That which is not said. Vanessa smiled a lot, praised everything, but her eyes were cold like porcelain. But something about Vanessa always seemed to me rehearsed. Before dinner, I picked up the phone to confirm if they were really coming at 7. The call rang only once before they answered. On the other side, I heard footsteps, muffled laughter, and shortly after, Jason's voice. I realized they had answered without noticing. Perhaps the phone was on speaker, resting on some counter. Instinctively, I stayed silent. She will fall for it easily, said Vanessa, and my body froze. We just need to convince her calmly. The house is too big for her. I heard the sound of water, possibly washing something, followed by Jason's response, if you think it's time, all right. But speak gently. My chest tightened. They were talking about me. Vanessa continued, we need to convince her. The house needs to be ours soon. The words came like red-hot knives, cutting the security I felt until then. That was not just any conversation, it was a plan. A plan that clearly had been built for some time. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My heart beat like a drum. I wanted to hang up, scream, confront. But something inside me, ancient and firm, whispered, listen to the end. Do not interrupt. Understand who these people are. Even if it hurts. Vanessa, we need to convince her. The house needs to be ours soon. I kept listening without making a sound. The conversation didn't last much longer, but it was enough. When they hung up, I stood there for a few seconds staring at the phone, as if that would explain something to me. The house. My home. My refuge. They wanted to take it from me with sweet words, with concern, with the pretext of help. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood there, motionless, feeling the truth slowly run down my spine. Jason, my only son, was allowing that. Vanessa might be the mastermind, but he consented. You don't need a dagger to betray someone. Sometimes complicit silence is enough. I went back to the kitchen with automatic gestures. I set the table as if nothing had happened. I took the dish out of the oven, took the pie off the sideboard, arranged the flowers in the center of the table. On the outside, I was the same Margaret as always. On the inside, a deep crack was forming. The sound of the car arriving pulled me from my thoughts. The children ran to me, and I hugged them as if they were anchors. Jason and Vanessa came right behind, smiling as if life were perfect. And I smiled back, because now I needed to see everything. With new eyes. Dinner would be served, and now, with different eyes. Vanessa was impeccable. A light blouse, hair tied in an elegant bun, discreet perfume. She sat at the table with a wide smile, praising the decoration as if it were the first time she saw the house. "This living room is so cozy, Margaret. You have great taste." I just thanked her, observing every gesture. She offered to serve the plates, praised the pie before even tasting it. She toasted with juice, laughed with the children. The type of behavior that would charm anyone. But now, knowing what I know, I saw beyond. Every gesture seemed millimetrically calculated, like someone rehearsing a presentation. Ben asked for more potatoes and she promptly got up to get them. "Leave it, dear," I said. "You are my guest." She smiled but insisted I want to help I feel at home. And that was it. She wanted to feel at home as the owner, not as a guest. I noticed between the lines what previously escaped me. While she talked about how the children loved the lake, I saw the coldness behind the enthusiasm. Every compliment to the house now carried a different weight. It wasn't admiration. It was desire. And mainly strategy. The kind of kindness that doesn't come from the heart. She wants something. And she will try to get it with smiles. Throughout the dinner, Jason avoided my eyes. He answered the children, asked generic questions about the garden, but every time I stared at him, his eyes fled. I saw in him something I hadn't seen in years: guilt. Not fear, not discomfort, guilt. There was a moment when Lily dropped a piece of bread, and he quickly bent down to clean it. When he stood up, our eyes met for a second. Long enough for me to see the boy I raised trying to hide the shame of a man. And I understood. He knew. He wasn't a victim of Vanessa's manipulation. He was an accomplice. In that fraction of a second, something in me broke and aligned at the same time. The pain of discovery mixed with the clarity of understanding. I wasn't being betrayed by strangers. I was being sold by my own family. And the price was the house I built with so much effort alongside my late husband. Jason didn't say anything significant that night. But his silences said everything. And I listened more attentively than ever. Sometimes the greatest revelation is in what is not pronounced. And now I knew. He is not innocent. He is allowing it. After everyone left, I washed the dishes with calm movements. The hot water on my hands gave me a strange sensation of control. The sound of the night outside, the plates being stacked, the cloth drying the sink. Everything seemed normal. But inside me, something had shifted place. I went up to the bedroom, sat in the armchair by the window, and picked up my old black notebook. In it, I wrote everything. Every sentence I heard on the phone. Every rehearsed gesture of Vanessa. Jason's look. I wrote in detail, not to hold grudges, but to organize the steps of what would come next. There, on that page, I made the decision that would change everything. I would not react with scandals or arguments. I would act. With calm, with precision. Just as I took care of my house for decades, now I would take care of myself and what is mine. They think they know me, but they don't know my strength. I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and looked at the darkness outside. The lake reflected the moon as if it were also watching me. For the first time, I felt that something was in my favor, even if it was just my awakened conscience. I was ready. Let my silent movements begin. It was early morning when I decided I needed to talk to Evelyn. I wouldn't be able to sleep with that weight on my chest, and there was only one person I truly trusted. The woman who took care of my husband's will when he passed away. I called without thinking twice, even knowing the hour. Her voice, sleepy and still gentle, answered after the third ring. "Margaret, is everything all right?" I took a deep breath. No, it wasn't. I explained briefly, without beating around the bush, that I needed to talk as soon as possible. I scheduled it for the next morning at her office, something quick, before Vanessa and Jason noticed any movement. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange relief. As if, by naming the problem, it lost part of its power. But something inside me still trembled. I went back to bed, but I couldn't close my eyes. I looked at the ceiling, remembering the words said on the speakerphone, the diverted glances, the table set with care. For those who didn't deserve it. A part of me wanted to believe that everything was a mistake, that I was exaggerating. But instinct is a silent wisdom. And mine was screaming for protection. I got up before the sun rose, made some tea, put on my blue coat, and prepared a folder with the house documents. When I walked out the door, the cold cut my face, but I felt alive. For the first time, I was moving with intention, not just reacting. I need to protect something before they try to take it. Evelyn welcomed me with hot coffee and attentive eyes. Her office was welcoming as always, with lined-up books and frames with inspiring quotes on the walls. I sat across from her and began to tell the story. I said everything. Every detail of the call heard by mistake, Jason's expression, Vanessa's fake compliments. Evelyn just listened without interrupting. At certain moments she just nodded, as if she already imagined part of what I was saying. When I finished, the silence was long. She stood up, closed the office door, and returned with a look that mixed compassion and strategy. "Margaret, do you still have total control over the property?" I nodded. "Then it's now or never." She opened a drawer and took out some papers. She explained calmly what an irrevocable trust meant. "It's like putting the house in an invisible dome," she said. "Even if they try by all means legally, they won't be able to touch it. And you will still be able to live in it for as long as you want without altering your routine." That made immediate sense. It wasn't a defense against bad people, it was an act of love for myself. And for everything I built. Evelyn looked at me firmly. "If you want them never to touch it, this is the way. If you want them never to touch it, this is the way." The next day, I went back to Evelyn's office with the complete folder. I signed everything with steady hands, without hesitation. The words had been said, the facts were clear, and now the acts would be too. The trust was officialized. The house protected. No future signature, not even mine, could undo it. Upon leaving the notary's office, the wind seemed less biting. I drove back along the lake road, watching the trees starting to lose their leaves. That house had been the setting of my youth, of Jason's birth, of nights with my husband by the fireplace. Now it would just be mine. Truly. I told no one. Not a word. Silence became my ally. I returned home, prepared tea, sat on the porch as if nothing had changed. Inside, however, everything was different. I was the master of my destiny, and I had just registered that on paper. In the late afternoon, the phone rang. It was Jason. I looked at the screen, saw his name light up and vibrate, but I didn't answer. I watched in silence, with the same gaze with which I now viewed everything around me. Jason was calling. She just looked at the phone, motionless. 2 days later, I received a message from Vanessa asking for a frank and respectful conversation. I replied with a simple sure. I told her to come to the house the next afternoon. I prepared tea as I always did, placed cookies on the porcelain plate, and arranged the living room cushions. I wanted everything to be exactly the same, so she wouldn't notice the change that had already happened. When Vanessa arrived, she wore that same polite smile as always, but this time with a slight touch of tension. She sat on the sofa with her hands clasped, like someone rehearsing a request. She started talking about the busy life, the children, the financial pressure. I listened in silence, only offering tea and a serene look. "Margaret," she said, "you know that this house demands a lot. And we thought, maybe if you could advance something for Jason, a kind of living inheritance, it would be such a generous gesture." She touched my arm lightly. Nothing drastic, of course. Just allowing us to take care of what will be ours one day. The sentence came like a cold draft. And then I understood her game. She thought I was fragile. She thought an emotional appeal would be enough. That I would touch on the subject out of guilt, with the weight of age, widowhood, time. But now I already knew that behind the care there was ambition. And that changed everything. She thinks I am fragile. That I will touch on the subject out of guilt. I looked at Vanessa calmly. I took a deep breath before speaking, and my words came out low but sharp. "Vanessa, last week I made a call to confirm dinner. You answered by mistake. And I heard." She froze, still smiling, as if the sentence hadn't been comprehended. But I continued. "I heard your voice. I heard the plan." The silence that followed was dense. Her eyes widened slightly, but she tried to maintain composure. The cup in her hands trembled, and her lips, previously so articulate, were pale. I observed her with the serenity of someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. I didn't say anything before because I was listening, observing. Vanessa didn't answer. She tried to swallow the tea but gave up. She was pale as wax, motionless. The confident woman who walked through that door no longer existed. Now before me was someone cornered by her own lie. For the first time I felt I had real control of the conversation. I didn't need to confront with anger. It was enough just to name the truth. and I tore her apart without raising my voice. Vanessa turns pale and says not a word. I stood up slowly and walked to the living room door. Vanessa, I want you to leave now. And I want to make something very clear: never pressure me again. Never try to take something that is not yours again. My voice was low, firm. She got up without saying anything, grabbed her bag and walked to the door without looking back. I opened the door and waited. The cold afternoon wind blew between us. She hesitated for a second, perhaps expecting me to say something, perhaps believing I would change my mind. But no, it was over. I closed the door as soon as she crossed the threshold. I locked it. For the first time, the sound of the key turning was a milestone. Something symbolic and definitive. That door, so often open to welcome, now became a boundary. And I was the only one responsible for it. I sat in the living room armchair, closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The silence of the house didn't scare me. On the contrary, it strengthened me. It was mine. And finally it was safe. She closes the door and locks it. For the first time. The next morning, I heard the sound of Jason's car parking. I hadn't arranged anything with him, but I imagined he would come. I was waiting in a way. I tapped the dishcloth on the sink, took a deep breath and went to the door. When I opened it, he was there with shoulders slumped, hands in his pockets, a dejected expression. Mom, can we talk? I nodded and let him in. He sat on the sofa like someone carrying a burden. He took a while to speak. Vanessa told me about yesterday. I nodded slightly. I waited. She shouldn't have done that. But we were desperate. The bills, the kids. And then he cried. His hands covered his face, contained sobs, and I remained silent. There was no more room for consolation, only listening. I never wanted to hurt you, he said finally. I just thought maybe it would be easier. For everyone. And it was then that I replied, with a serene yet cutting voice, the house is no longer mine, Jason. And it will never be yours either. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes red, confused. What do you mean? I added nothing else. I just stared at him, letting him absorb the meaning. I saw in his eyes the beginning of understanding. As if, for the first time, he felt that something was truly out of reach. That he had lost. And that he was no longer the son who could ask, pressure, or assume. He widens his eyes. Now he begins to understand. Jason remained silent for a few minutes, as if looking for words to retrace the path back. But there was no return. What was said, done, and decided was sealed. He stood up slowly, still not looking me straight in the eye. He walked to the door, turned for a moment, and tried to smile. I didn't reciprocate. The pain was greater than any empty gesture. Are you angry with me? He asked. I could have said yes, but that wasn't it. I was disappointed, wounded, but strangely steady. I am just protecting what I built, I replied. And you chose to allow them to try to take that from me. He nodded, with watery eyes, and left without saying anything else. I stood there for long minutes after the door closed. The silence was dense but not suffocating. It was a type of silent mourning, not for what I lost, but for what I discovered I never had. Jason was my son, yes. But his love for me always came after the desire to please Vanessa, to avoid conflict, to omit himself. I sat in the armchair, pulled a blanket over my legs and looked out the window. The landscape was the same, but something in me was different. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. He was my son. But I was my own mother now. In the days that followed, I went into practical mode. Evelyn and I exchanged short and discreet emails. She understood without me needing to explain much. It was time to leave. I started the process of selling the house and the apartment in Burlington silently. Every document, every step, everything was done with caution. I packed only the essentials, some clothes, the notebooks, old photos, and a ceramic vase my mother had given me. The rest would stay. There was no attachment to the objects, only history. And my history now needed a new setting. Evelyn took care of everything with impeccable efficiency. No one knew anything. Not Jason, not Vanessa. The children continued sending me drawings and notes through school, and I answered them with affection. But I didn't tell them what was coming. It was a silent farewell, not a goodbye. And I needed it to be that way. Only Evelyn and the buyer knew the plan. While folding a blanket into the suitcase, I smiled with the thought, if someone someday wrote my story, maybe they would think it an exaggeration. But only those who have been betrayed without screams know the strength of an escape in silence. No one knew. Only Evelyn and the buyer. Thomas arrived on a gray late afternoon. Polite, discreet, punctual. He shook my hand with respect and asked no questions. Evelyn had chosen well. The contract was signed at the living room table, between a cup of tea and a whisper of leaves outside. When he left, the sale was finalized. I sat for a while looking at the paper with the signature. It was definitive. My name was no longer linked to that house, but my spirit was. And that was why I wrote 2 letters with slow and firm handwriting. One for Ben. Another for Lily. I folded them carefully, placed them in envelopes with red ribbons. I asked Evelyn to deliver them at Christmas. It was symbolic. It was the time I needed for them to grow a little more. For the words written there to have weight and meaning. I didn't promise a return. I promised remembrance. There was no way to explain everything to them now. But one day they would know. And maybe then they would understand. Ben and Lily would receive the letters. At Christmas. On the morning of the departure, the sky was clear. I grabbed the last suitcase, looked out the bedroom window, and observed the lake. The calm surface hid how much it knew about me. Of the pains, the laughter, the losses. The house seemed to breathe in silence as if telling me, go. I keep you within me. I closed the door carefully. No noise. No tears. Just the sound of the latch and a final sigh. The keys stayed on the table, next to the letter for the new owners, thanking them for taking good care of the house. It was everything. Everything that was left. And everything that was enough. In the car, I drove without haste, without a defined destination. I just knew I wouldn't return. Along the road, I saw signs I had never noticed, small villages, trees that seemed to wave. Freedom has this sweet taste of uncertainty. I didn't cry. I didn't say goodbye. I just went, like someone who chooses finally to take care of herself. She left the lake and found the ocean. I learned later from Evelyn's reports that the discovery was devastating. Jason and Vanessa arrived home on any given morning and found the facade empty, the curtains removed, the gate with a new lock. The private property sign stared at them like a sentence. They tried to enter, but the new resident, who had bought it from Thomas, didn't recognize them. The house had followed its course, and without them. Jason, in panic, began calling relatives, friends, acquaintances. No one knew about me. Not address, not city, not reason. He even went to the local notary, but there was no longer any link in my name. Vanessa screamed on the phone, sent messages, but all came back as undelivered. For the first time I had disappeared and no one had clues. I imagined the despair stamped on my son's face, the disbelief of someone who always thought he would have one more chance, one more conversation. Vanessa, however, didn't show pain. She showed anger. Anger for the lost control, for the frustrated strategy, for the game ended without warning. And Jason? He just stayed silent. Evelyn told me that after several attempts he called her office. He asked for help, asked for answers. And she replied with firmness and compassion, Margaret does not wish for contact. It was the final blow. He called everyone. No one knew where she was. What came next I learned from a distance. Vanessa blamed Jason for everything. Said he should have acted sooner, that he was weak, that he let the opportunity slip away. They argued, they broke up. The house, the money, the plan, everything had slipped through their hands. Jason tried to justify himself, but there was no way to fix something that was never built with truth. It was then that Evelyn officially blocked any legal access. No contestation request, no lawsuit, no loophole. The house had passed from a trust to the buyer. The line was unrecoverable. From a legal point of view, they didn't exist in that story anymore. They were out. And there was no way back. Jason cried in Evelyn's office. He begged for news, for an address, a chance. But she, faithful to my decision, remained firm. She chose silence. And her silence will be respected. Vanessa had already left days before. She took the children and went to her parents' house, leaving Jason immersed in guilt. Evelyn later wrote me a letter saying he seemed smaller. As if he had shrunk before his own reflection. A man who waited too long. And lost everything. The lawyer was clear. Margaret does not wish for contact. What touched me the most in this part of the story was knowing that Ben and Lily started asking for me. Evelyn told me that, during a visit to the old neighborhood, Jason was approached by Ben, who asked Daddy when is Grandma coming back. He didn't know how to answer. He looked at his son with watery eyes and just lowered his head. Lily insisted, does she still like us? And again silence. There was no lie that fit that question. There was no way to explain what even he didn't understand. The absence was a shapeless hole, impossible to fill with excuses. They didn't know. They couldn't know. And yet, they felt it. I learned that, after that, Jason started keeping the children's drawings. As if they were notes for a bridge he no longer knew how to cross. Maybe deep down he knew that everything could have been different. Just one choice was enough. One courage. But he chose the wrong silence. And now I was the one speaking without saying a word. And that finally had weight. For the first time he felt the weight of what he had lost. My new house is located on a dead-end street in Bar Harbor, Maine. Small with large windows and a light wood porch. The garden blooms with lavender and hydrangeas, and in the morning, the sound of seagulls mixes with the smell of coffee. There is no luxury, there are no old memories, only a fresh start. And it is all I need. I walk barefoot through the house, play low music, reorganize the books in alphabetical order. Sometimes I spend hours just looking at the sea, sitting with a blanket on my knees and a cup of tea in my hands. I don't have noisy neighbors, nor unexpected visits. Just peace. I don't write in the black notebook anymore. I put it away in the bottom drawer like someone closing a cycle. Now my words are written in the steam of the window, in scribbled recipes, in flower shop notes. Solitude, contrary to what many think, can be a home. And this is mine. No one calls me. No one shows up. And that's okay. The mornings of tea and silence were her greatest achievement. One day, a letter arrived with childish handwriting on the envelope. The sender, Ben Turner. I opened it with trembling hands. It was simple, with drawings on the borders and words written with effort. The teacher had helped, of course. He said he missed me, that school was hard without my cakes, and that Lily still slept with the bear I gave her. I read and reread every line. The longing was there, without demand, without judgment. Just pure love. He talked about a tree he planted in the schoolyard and said he called it Grandma's tree. He said he hoped it would grow strong and stay close to him, even if I wasn't there. I cried. Not like before, in silence, with relief. Those words reached me in a way that not even Evelyn could with her exact phrases. Ben asked for nothing. He just reminded me that he existed. And that our bond was stronger than any house wall. I kept the letter in a wooden box with shells. It was the beginning of something. He still remembered the smell of the apple pie. I replied the next day. I used a plain sheet of paper and a blue ink pen. I wrote slowly, feeling the weight of every word. I didn't explain anything. I just said, Mommy and Daddy don't need to know. I received your letter. And it made me smile. I signed with a heart and the name they called me when they were little, Grandma Margie. There was no need for more. Ben would understand. Children have a language that crosses what adults try to hide. And I wanted to protect them even from afar. Let them know that, despite everything, I still carried them with me. I mailed the letter with cold hands, warm heart. For the first time I felt no guilt for choosing distance. The choice had been for real affection, not for imposed coexistence. And that, I realized, was also love. I will never know if Vanessa read the letter. But it didn't matter. It was little. But it was real. On that rainy morning, Evelyn showed up without warning. It wasn't her custom, and just seeing her standing at the door, with a serious face and heavy eyes, I knew something grave had happened. I invited her in, prepared tea, and waited. She was holding an envelope, but took a while to speak. She sat down, took a deep breath, and then said, Margaret, Jason had an accident. The news fell like a stone in my chest, but I didn't let anything break on the outside. I just faced the silence, as if it gave me time to organize the pain. Evelyn explained, car, rain, narrow road. He was in a coma. Vanessa had disappeared. No one knew where she was since the night before the accident. The children were with their maternal grandparents. I stayed motionless. His name echoed inside like an old rusty bell. Jason. My boy. The one who failed me, yes, but who was still part of me. Evelyn spoke little but with precision. She said he was stable, but the doctors didn't know for how long. I listened but didn't react. It was as if I had left my body. She opened her purse and took out a form with information from the hospital. They don't have full insurance. And the costs are high. She placed it on the table with respect. Then she fell silent. She knew I would understand what wasn't said. He is in a coma. Vanessa disappeared. I took the form, read line by line. Every number seemed like a sentence. I saw the hospital details, the exams, the estimates. Evelyn didn't pressure me, just waited. She didn't say he deserved it, didn't ask for him. She just showed me the facts. It was what I respected most about her, the space. The right to decide without coercion. I went back to looking out the window. The seagulls flew over the sea, and the world seemed to continue as always. My son was lying in a hospital bed. Alone. Lost between mistakes and the late chance to wake up. And I, on this side, alive, lucid, strong. It was a painful distance but necessary. Evelyn finished her tea, stood up, and before leaving, touched my shoulder. "You don't need to answer now," she said. I just nodded. But deep down I already knew what I would do. There were things that didn't need to be explained. Love can also exist with boundaries. It can care. Without returning, I went back to my desk, opened the computer, and went to the hospital website. I used the data from the form and, on the same day, transferred the total amount. Without a signature, without a message, without a name. Just the anonymous care of someone who once gave birth and now chose not to get close. But she hands over a hospitalization form with the costs. I told no one. Evelyn found out through the hospital and understood instantly. The amount was received. The treatment was guaranteed. There was no fanfare, no mention. Jason would never know where it came from. And that was what I wanted. That he would heal, get back on his feet, but without taking me as a support. Without leaning on a story that he himself broke. I cried at night alone. Not for the pain of loss but for the firm choice I now carried. It was easier to have disappeared completely. Easier to pretend that nothing linked me to him anymore. But there was something. Small. Invisible. Like a silk thread between two continents. I could have said it's not my problem. I could have been cold as he was. But no. I did what needed to be done. As I always did with every person I loved. I cared. Even without recognition. Even without return. Because love doesn't need to be theater. And in that silent gesture, I refused the role of martyr, and embraced that of a whole woman. She helped. But she kept the door closed. I received a note from Evelyn a week later. Simple: Jason woke up. First word: Mom. I read the sentence and left the paper on the kitchen counter. There was no physical impact, nor stumble nor fainting. Just an internal echo. Mom. That word that was once so mine. That today just passed through me. Evelyn called right after, asking if I wanted to go. She said she could accompany me, that the wing was restricted and discreet. I thanked her but refused. There was no room in me for visits, for tears by the bedside, for reconciliations. My choice was still silence. Jason was alive. That was enough. For the first time, Evelyn hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to see him? I replied I am. And I hung up. I went to walk by the seaside, with the wind hitting my face. The horizon was long, blue, infinite. The pain smaller than before. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a memory. But she was not in the room. Nor would she be. 2 days later I went to the hospital. But only to the parking lot. Evelyn was waiting for me at the reception, with lowered eyes and a discreet smile. She handed me a visitor's badge, but I didn't use it. I asked just to look. 5 minutes, I said. And she understood. I stood behind the glass. Jason was sitting up, thin, pale, with tubes still attached to his arm. There were tears in his eyes. He was talking to a nurse, perhaps remembering something. His eyes scanned the room like someone waiting for someone. But I didn't go in. I just observed. He didn't see me. And that was what I wanted. To see him alive. Breathing. In recovery. But without knowing I had been there. That was my moment. Not his. I looked for a few more seconds. Then I handed the badge to Evelyn and left in silence. I went back to the car. Turned on the radio. And drove away. She looked through the glass. And left without entering. On the way back, Evelyn asked, "Will you see him someday?" I smiled. A sincere smile, almost light. "I have already seen everything I needed," I replied. And it was true. What was in me was not a grudge, it was an end. The line between love and abandonment is not always clear, but I learned to walk on it with firmness. I arrived home in the late afternoon. I prepared tea, opened the window and sat down to write in my new notebook. It wasn't a diary of pain anymore. It was a notebook of presence, of decisions, of memories of mine, without justifications, without applause, just pages of a whole woman. Jason, wherever he is, will live his journey, and I mine. Our stories crossed, got hurt, and now respect each other from a distance. And that is also love. A love that does not demand coexistence. That doesn't charge, doesn't insist, just observes and moves on. I closed the notebook, and for the first time I felt complete. And she returned home with a light heart. Today my life is made of small silent gestures. I answer Ben and Lily's letters with delicacy, choosing words that warm without hurting. I speak little about the past, but I keep every envelope as a treasure. I never spoke to Jason again. Vanessa disappeared from our emotional map, and I don't miss her. I opened a small cafe with a library in Bar Harbor. It is a calm place with the smell of apple cake and the sound of pages turning. Older women come to me in search of peace, of listening, of guidance. Most don't know my story and don't need to know. They just sit, drink tea, and start believing in their own strength again. I don't look for reunions. I don't feed longings that hurt. What I built here is real, present, whole. My home now is made of shared comfort, of advice exchanged in silence, of looks that don't judge. When I walk between the tables, I see in every woman a part of me, and I recognize myself in them with gratitude. Every morning while wiping the counter, I think with serenity. I carry no rancor. I desire no revenge. I just chose a path where I didn't need to hurt to survive, where loving myself became a priority. And then I smile alone with the cup in my hand. I did not become bitter. I became free. Now I am curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving another story on the end screen that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.